Welcome back. Well, we are going to now study the first chapter in our syllabus. And we began in our last session just briefly, but now we want to review what we did in the last part of the last presentation and then move through this chapter. It's found on page 3 of your syllabus. Just reviewing, Jesus is our Creator. And therefore, Jesus is responsible for our existence, not for our sin, but for our existence. When Jesus created this world, He placed Adam as the king. And his territory, of course, was planet Earth. But God established a condition, and that was perfect obedience to His law, sinless perfection, if you please. He said to Adam, obey and live, disobey and die. And of course, Adam and Eve sinned, and therefore Satan took over the throne and the territory over which Adam governed. Therefore, the human race needed a redeemer, someone who would pay the price to buy us back from slavery, who could pay the price to recover our lost possession. But in order for a person to do this, he needed to be our next of kin. Now we're at the middle of page 4. Leviticus 25 verse 25 tells us who only could redeem a lost possession, that is territory. It says, if one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possession, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold. That word redeem in the Hebrew means to buy back by paying a price. In other words, you pay a price and you buy back what was sold. All human beings actually sold their possession because we all sinned after Adam sinned, and therefore only a next of kin can recover the lost possession. Now, what about if a person sold himself into slavery? Individuals could not only sell their possessions, they could also sell themselves into slavery. Only a next of kin could pay the price to emancipate people from slavery. It says in Leviticus 25, verse 47, now if a sojourner or stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner close to you, or to a member of the stranger's family, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. Once again, the word goel, which means to redeem by paying a price, may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who is near of kin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he is able, he may redeem himself. Well, that's a hypothetical statement, because if he sold himself into slavery, he couldn't very well redeem himself. So in order for an individual to redeem the lost possession, and redeemed people who had sold themselves into slavery needed to be a close relative or a next of kin. Within the human race, there was no one who could redeem the lost possession and could redeem the human race from slavery, because all became slaves. At the top of page 5, we find in Romans 3 verse 10 and verse 23, there is none righteous, no, not one. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So this is the real reason why Jesus became a human being, because He had to become our next of kin. You see, only a next of kin could redeem the lost possession and people who had sold themselves into slavery. So Jesus had to become our next of kin. Let me ask you, when Jesus was in heaven before His incarnation, was He our next of kin? No, because He did not have human flesh. He was not a human being. He was from a different family. He had to become our next of kin in order to redeem us from slavery, in order to redeem the lost possession. And so, now Jesus in heaven, at a certain point, says to all of the heavenly angels, I am leaving heaven and I'm going to earth. I'm going to become incarnate and I'm going to live there for 30 years. And I promise you that after 30 years, I'll be back. So make sure you prepare the party. And so it says in John 1 verse 14, and the Word became flesh. In other words, our next of kin, and dwelt among us. And we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Hebrews 2:14 through 16 also says that He became our next of kin. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken flesh and blood, He Himself likewise shared in the same, that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death, that is of the devil, and do what as a result of his death? And release. That means redeem or recover, freedom. It says, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. So why did Jesus become our flesh and blood? So that He could release us from bondage. Those are the laws of redemption. Now here's something interesting. Jesus was both the father of David and the son of David. Now how can you be someone's father and son at the same time? Notice Revelation 22 and verse 16. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star. So Jesus is both the father of David, He's the root of David, and He is also the son of David or the offspring of David. How's that possible that He's the father and the son of David? Well, He's the father of David as the creator, but He's the son of David because He became our next of kin from the lineage of David. The same is true with Abraham. Jesus is the father of Abraham and the son of Abraham. You say, really? Well, Matthew 1 verse 1, top of page 6, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. But then Jesus in John 8 verse 58 says, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. So Jesus is the son of Abraham because He's a man, and He's the father of Abraham because He was the creator of Abraham. So Jesus had to become our next of kin in order to redeem the lost possession and in order to redeem us from the slavery that we sold ourselves into. Now, in the next section, the twofold mission of Jesus. Jesus came to this world for two main reasons. The sanctuary begins in the camp where sinners live, because Jesus lived for 30 years before He died. So His life is just as important as His death. Jesus had to live a perfect, sinless life in our camp to weave a robe of righteousness. Every act of obedience of Jesus became a thread in the robe. And when Jesus said on the cross, it is finished, He added the last thread to the robe of righteousness. He had a perfect life of righteousness that He could impute and impart to us. After living a sinless life, He had to die to pay the penalty for sin. Only He who created all could offer to take the place of all. Jesus is responsible for our existence, but not for our sin. So these two functions of Jesus, His perfect life, perfect robe of righteousness that He wove, and His death is presented in Exodus 12, 5, and 6, for example. Speaking about the Passover lamb, it says, your lamb shall be without blemish. That represents the perfect life of Jesus. It's before the lamb is slain. It has to be a lamb with no blemish. A male of the first year, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. And now comes the second function of the Passover lamb. Not only without blemish, that's the perfect life of Jesus. It says, then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall what? Shall kill it at twilight. Two functions. A perfect lamb, unblemished, and then the unblemished lamb is slain. Jesus lived a perfect life, wove a robe of righteousness, and then he paid for sin. 1 Peter 1, 18 to 20 presents these two functions of Jesus. It says there in verse 18, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things, like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ. So there you have one function of Jesus, the shedding of his blood. But there's another function. As of a lamb, how? Without blemish and without spot. So two functions. His precious blood is shed, and he is without blemish and without spot. He indeed was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you. Did Satan know what Jesus had to come to do? Did his demons know what Jesus was coming to this earth to do? That he was coming to emancipate the human race and to recover the lost possession? Yes, he did. Notice this encounter. This is the top of page 7. This encounter between the demons and Jesus. They knew exactly who he was and why he was here. In Mark 1, 23 and 24 it says, now there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? And now notice their big concern. Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. Satan and his angels knew exactly who Jesus was and why Jesus had come. And so Satan, from the very start, he says, I have to nip this in the bud. I know who he is, why he came. He's going to live a perfect life. He's going to die for sin. I have to keep that from happening. And so Satan now is going to use 4 methods to try and prevent Jesus from living his perfect life and from offering his life for sin. And so now Satan is going to be on the track of Jesus 24/7, 365 and a quarter days. What was method number 1? Method number 1 was to attempt to kill Jesus before he could voluntarily offer his life. Revelation 12, 2 and 3 says that when Jesus was born, Satan was there ready to kill him. I read, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as he was born. So Satan says, I'll kill him when he's born. That way he can't offer his life voluntarily to pay for the sin of sinners. Satan also tried to drown Jesus in a tempest. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 24, he knew Jesus was sleeping in the boat. This was a storm out of season. Ellen White describes it as a massive storm, such as never had been seen before. It says, and suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with waves, but he was asleep. And of course, Jesus calmed the storm. Also, a mob tried to push Jesus over a cliff. And Ellen White explicitly says that Satan was in that mob. And there were actually angels disguised as human beings, encouraging the people to throw Jesus over the cliff. It says there in chapter 4, verse 28 of Luke, so all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, some politically incorrect statements that Jesus made, were filled with wrath and rose up and thrust him out of the city. And they led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. Then passing through the midst of them, he went his way. Several times during the ministry of Jesus, they tried to stone Jesus. Of course, Satan was behind it. Kill him before he offers his life for sin. It says there, in John 8, verse 58 and 59, Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Then they took up stones to throw at him, and this happened more than once. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Ellen White gives us an enlightening statement about Satan's desire to kill Christ before he could offer his life voluntarily for sin. In the Review and Herald, October 12, 1897, she wrote, "Again and again he would have been killed, had it not been for the heavenly angels who attended him and guarded his life until the time when the case of the Jews as a nation should be decided. This human life must be kept by the power of God until his day of work was ended." So he was protected by God till the moment when he could offer his life as a sacrifice for sin. So his first method was to try and kill Jesus before Jesus could offer his life voluntarily. The second method that Satan used was to try and infect Jesus with the virus of sin. Because if Jesus became a sinner, he would also need someone to redeem him from slavery and to recover the lost possession. We all know about the temptations of Jesus. Matthew chapter 4, verse 3, verse 6, and verse 9. It says that Satan came to Jesus 3 times with 3 temptations at the beginning of his ministry, and Jesus would not be infected. All 3 times Jesus answered, "It is written." We have several verses of the Bible that indicate that Jesus never sinned. Hebrews 4, verse 15 at the top of page 9. "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin." So Jesus was tempted in all things as we are, yet Jesus never sinned. Jesus did not become a slave. Jesus did not lose his possession. Hebrews 7:26 emphasizes the sinlessness of Christ as well. "For such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens." So once again, holy, harmless, undefiled, and separate from sinners. Jesus never sinned. In John 8:46, Jesus challenged those who were listening to him. "Which of you convicts me of sin?" And of course the answer is no one. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 5 once again underlines the sinlessness of Christ. It says, "And you know that he was manifested to take away our sins, and in him there is no sin." 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 21 and 22. "For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his life," or in his mouth. So was Satan successful with his second method, to infect Jesus with the virus of sin? No, Jesus had to weave a perfect robe of righteousness. And once again, every act of obedience was a thread that he added to the robe. And when Jesus cried out on the cross, "It is finished," the robe was complete and available for every single human being on planet Earth. But the devil used a third method. And that third method was to give Jesus an easier way to get the kingdom of the world back. Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 and 9 speaks about the encounter of Jesus with the devil on the Mount of Temptation, the third temptation. See, the devil is going to offer Jesus an easier way of getting the kingdom back. It says there, again, "The devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me.'" In other words, he was saying to Jesus, you actually think you have to be here, and they mistreat you, and you speak words to them, and they reject you, and you think you have to go to Gethsemane and bear the sins of the world upon yourself, and you're going to be beaten, and you're going to suffer. He says, no! There's an easier way. I'll give you all the kingdom back as long as you just bow down and worship me just for a second. He was offering Jesus an easier way of recovering what was lost. But the devil used this method of giving Jesus an easier way several times during his ministry. In John chapter 6 and verse 15, we find Jesus had already fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And so now the multitude, instigated by Judas Iscariot, I might say, tries to take Jesus by force to make him a king. In other words, Satan is saying, don't go to the cross. There's a plan B. There's a much easier plan, a better plan for you. And so it says in John 6, verse 15, therefore when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. He said, I have to go to the cross to recover that which was lost, to emancipate the human race, and to recover the kingdom. I'm not going to take over the throne now because that would defeat the purpose. Satan even used Peter to try and distract Christ from going to the cross. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 22 and 23, it says, then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him because Jesus has just said, I got to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be mistreated. I'm going to die and resurrect the third day. And Peter is indignant because Peter thinks that the Messiah is going to sit on the throne in Jerusalem. He's going to proclaim himself king and rule the world. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. However, he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Who was using Peter as an instrument? Satan. What was Satan trying to do? To distract Jesus from going to the cross. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. Even on the Mount of Transfiguration, after Jesus is transfigured by his Father, as he will appear at his second coming, after Moses and Elijah have come to speak with Jesus, Peter still didn't get it. Because Jesus at that point was on his way to Jerusalem with the disciples. He said, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to suffer, and I'm going to die. And so Peter now makes an interesting suggestion to Jesus. He still didn't get it. Matthew 17, verse 4, then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Not Jerusalem, here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Let's stay on the mountain. Let's not go back to the valley. Satan even uses good things to try and produce a bad result. You remember some Greeks came to Jesus and they wanted an interview with Jesus? They said, we would see Jesus. And I want you to notice John chapter 12, verses 20 and 24. Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. But Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Most assuredly I say unto you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. You know, you read Ellen White's comments about this. The purpose of Satan was to distract Jesus from going to the cross because these Greeks wanted Jesus to go preach the gospel in Greece. And Jesus is saying, listen, the time has not come for me to preach the gospel in Greece and perform miracles in Greece. The time has come for me to die. Because if I don't die, the seed remains alone. But if I die and am buried, it will produce much fruit. In other words, I will have many children redeemed as a result. And of course, Jesus was speaking about his death. In verses 31 to 33, it says, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be what? Cast out. What was going to cast out the ruler of this world? Was it Jesus taking over the throne in Jerusalem that was going to cast him out? No. What did Jesus have to do? Verse 32. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. And you know, there are statements in the New Testament where it says that Jesus put his face towards Jerusalem in the last journey. In other words, he would not be distracted from going to the cross, because he knew that only paying the price on the cross could recover freedom for the slaves and a recovery of the possession that had been lost. Satan even used Judas to try and distract Jesus from going to the cross. In fact, you know, Judas did not betray Jesus because he wanted Jesus to be killed. You're aware of that, right? Because if that was his intention, when they took Jesus and he was suffering everything, he would have been happy. But he went and hung himself because his plan backfired. His purpose was really to put the pressure on Jesus so that Jesus would retaliate, so that Jesus would take the throne when they were mistreating him. In other words, the purpose was not to get Jesus killed. The purpose was to put the pressure on Jesus so that Jesus would take over the throne of Jerusalem, distracted from what he needed to do. In John 13, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended," where did this plan that Judas wanted to implement, where did it come from? It wasn't Judas. It says, "And supper being ended, the devil, having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." So, none of the first three methods worked. He wasn't able to kill Jesus before he gave up his life. He was not able to infect Jesus with the virus of sin. And he was not able to distract Jesus from going to Jerusalem and suffering and dying. But Satan used a fourth method. And that was, he did his best to discourage Jesus so that he would leave and allow the human race to perish. Satan influenced the people of Jesus to reject him, the disciples to forsake him, so that Jesus would say, "What's the use? I'm going back to heaven where I am appreciated." Matthew 26, verse 38, describes the sorrow of Jesus as he was in Gethsemane. It says, "Then he said to them, to his disciples, 'My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me.'" And of course, we're all acquainted with the prayer, the agonizing prayer of Jesus, raised up 3 times to his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's found in Matthew 26, verse 39, verse 42, and verse 44. It says there, "He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me.'" What was in the cup? The wrath of his own Father, the wrath of God. Why would the wrath of the Father be against Jesus? Because Jesus was bearing upon himself the sins of the whole world, to emancipate human beings from sin, from slavery, and to recover the possession which was lost. So Jesus says, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then it says, again a second time, "He went away and prayed, saying, 'Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done.' So he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words." Could Jesus have picked up and gone back to his Father if he had wanted to? Yes, he could have. So the devil is doing everything possible to discourage him. The devil is saying, "Look, nobody's going to accept you. Your disciples left. One of your disciples betrayed you. Another disciple denied you 3 times. Come on. Why are you going forward with this? It's useless." Ellen White wrote in Desire of Ages, page 692, "The fate of humanity trembled in the balance. Christ might even now refuse to drink the cup apportioned to guilty man. It was not yet too late. he might wipe the bloody sweat from his brow and leave man to perish in his iniquity. He might say, let the transgressor receive the penalty of his sin, and I will go back to my Father. Jesus could have given up. Satan did his utmost to discourage him from giving his life. John 18 verse 11 is a very interesting verse. You know, the mother of these two disciples, the sons of thunder, comes to Jesus and says, you know, in the kingdom, I want my two precious little sons to be one on the right side and the other on the left side when you enter your kingdom. You can be in the middle, but one on the right and the other on the left. And Jesus says, are they able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Let's pick up this in John chapter 18, verse 11. Chapter 18, verse 11, it says, so said to Peter, this is actually when Peter takes his sword out and cuts the ear off the servant. Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the what? The cup. Who gave him the cup? Which my Father has given me. Who gave Jesus the cup of his wrath? The Father himself. By the way, when Jesus asked these two disciples, are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? What was Jesus referring to? He was referring to his Father giving the cup of wrath for him to drink for the sin of the world. And what did the disciples say? They said, oh, we can. They didn't have the foggiest idea what they were talking about until they saw Jesus agonizing in Gethsemane. Then they understood it. Now, let's notice Desire of Ages, page 753. Satan, with his fierce temptations, wrung the heart of Jesus. The Savior could not see through the portals of the tomb. Hope did not present to him his coming forth from the grave a conqueror, or tell him of his Father's acceptance of the sacrifice. He feared that sin was so offensive to God that their separation was to be eternal. Christ felt the anguish which the sinner will feel when mercy shall no longer plead for the guilty race. It was the sense of sin bringing the Father's wrath upon him as man's substitute that made the cup he drank so bitter and broke the heart of the Son of God. So what was Satan trying to do? He was trying to discourage Jesus from going forward and saying, what's the use? Pick up and leave. Hebrews 5 verse 7 describes the agony of Jesus, the torture that Satan is inflicting on Christ. It says there, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up, listen to the intensity of this, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Can you feel the intensity as you read that verse? It's describing the agony of Jesus in Gethsemane. In fact, his agony was so great that Luke 22 verse 44 states, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. How much agony must you have in order to sweat blood instead of sweating water? I mean, his agony was fierce. Who do you suppose influenced the disciples to forsake Jesus? Of course, Satan. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to discourage Jesus. Not even the guys that were with you for 3.5 years, they're gone. If you can't save them, who are you going to be able to save? It says in Matthew 26:56, then all the disciples forsook him and fled. In fact, Satan influences Peter to deny Jesus 3 times. Even one of your precious disciples is denying you. It says there in Matthew chapter 26 and verses 73 and 74, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus who had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and what? He went out and wept bitterly. By the way, do you know who was using Peter as an instrument there? Let's read Luke 22, 31 and 32. This is before Peter actually denied Jesus, before Jesus went to his passion. It says, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, returned means when you have been converted, strengthen your brethren. And of course, Jesus reinstated Peter 3 times after his resurrection. Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? He denied him 3 times. Jesus reinstates him 3 times, saying, your sin is forgiven. So Satan is doing his utmost to discourage Jesus so that Jesus will leave. He led the mob to beat Jesus mercilessly. Mark chapter 14, verse 65 reads, then some began to spit on him and blindfold him and to beat him and to say to him, prophesy. And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. What is Satan's strategy here? It's to discourage Jesus. Say, what's the use? Leave while you can. Verses 16 through 20 of Mark 15 states, then the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium. And they called together the whole garrison, and they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and began to salute him, Hail, King of the Jews! Then they struck him on the head with a reed, and spat on him, and bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they took the purple off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. In fact, do you know that even while Jesus hung on the cross, Satan influenced the multitude to try and entice Jesus to come down from the cross? Notice Matthew 27, verses 41 to 43. Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, he saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now what? Come down. Prove that you are the King of Israel. And of course, Jesus is hearing that. What is Satan doing? He's daring Jesus to come down from the cross. And so it says, if he is King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Now, all during his ministry, Jesus had said, I'm not alone. My Father is with me. Notice John 8, verse 29. And he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do those things that please him. And he spoke these words. Many believed in him. But now I want you to notice the change in his mood. See, up to this point, during his ministry, he says, the Father is always with me. But now Jesus on the cross, he feels forsaken by his own Father. What is Satan trying to do? He's trying to say, listen, if you go through with this, you're never going to see your Father's face again. You're going to lose fellowship with him. You're going to suffer eternal perdition. You'll never see the person that you love the most in the entire universe. It says there in Matthew 27, verse 46, as Jesus there is hanging on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Are you catching the picture? So what is the devil trying to do? Did he know that Jesus had come to live a perfect life? Oh, yes, he did. Did he know that Jesus could stand in the place of all human beings because Jesus created all human beings? That he was the only one? Yeah, Satan knew that. The demons knew it. We read the verse in the Gospel of Mark where they said, we know who you are. You're the Holy One of God. You're the one that we used to hang out with in heaven, is what they're saying. They knew who Jesus was and why Jesus came. He had to live a perfect life and he had to die for sin. And Satan says, I'm going to use these 4 methods to prevent Jesus from fulfilling his mission. Number 1, kill him before he offers his life. Number 2, infect him with the virus of sin. Number 3, offer him a better path, an easier path, by taking over the throne of the kingdom. And 4, to discourage him so much that he'll pick up and he'll go back to heaven where he is appreciated. But then Jesus gained the final victory. In John 19 and verse 30, we find these words, so when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. What did Jesus mean when he said, it is finished? What was finished? Provision for salvation was finished. You know, there's been this big discussion in the Adventist church of whether the atonement was finished at the cross. Incidentally, Desmond Ford just passed away. And he was an individual who said that, the atonement was finished at the cross. There's no atonement in heaven after Jesus goes back to heaven. Well, Jesus said it is finished on the cross. Jesus finished his provision for salvation at the cross. Had Jesus lived a perfect life that he can impute and impart to us when he said it is finished on the cross? Yes. Was Jesus now dying to pay the penalty for sin? Yes. Was provision for salvation absolutely finished? Yes. What was not finished? What was not finished is Jesus interceding in heaven for those who claim the benefits of what he did while he was on earth. You see, you have to claim individually his life and his death for you. The provision was complete, but the application of the provision to individuals who claim Jesus still needed to be ongoing. Are you with me? So the atonement as provision was finished, but not as application to individuals who repent and confess their sins and trust in Jesus as Savior and Lord. And then Jesus pronounces these words, Luke 23 and verse 46. The last thing that Jesus says on the cross, it is finished. And then it says, and when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. What did Jesus mean when he said, into your hands I commend my spirit? What Jesus is saying is, Father, I commend my life into your hands because you have promised that if I am faithful to you, you will call me forth from the grave and resurrect me from the dead. That's what he's saying. You say, where do you get that from? Well, let's read this statement from Youth's Instructor, May 2, 1901. He who died for the sins of the world was to remain in the tomb for the allotted time. He was in that stony prison house as a prisoner of divine justice. And he was responsible to whom? To the judge of the universe. That is the individual he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He was bearing the sins of the world. Now listen carefully. He was bearing the sins of the world, and his Father only could release him. Jesus was in the tomb, a prisoner of divine justice. Only his Father could call him forth. That's why Jesus says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Say, I'm commending my life into your hands because you've promised that if I was faithful, if I live a perfect life, and if I die for sin, you promise that you will call me forth from the grave. I'm committing my life into your hands. Did Satan know that Jesus had predicted that he was going to resurrect? Oh, of course he did. Why do you suppose he had this Roman guard put at the entrance to the tomb? Why do you suppose he had this huge stone rolled in front, as if a little pebble of a stone could keep Jesus in the tomb? He should have known better, because he knew what the power of Jesus was like. In fact, there were demons present there at the entrance to the tomb, according to the spirit of prophecy. He knew that Jesus had predicted that he was going to resurrect. So very early on the first day of the week, two angels come down from heaven. One angel rolls away the stone. The other angel stands in front of the tomb. And let's read the description that Ellen White gives of this joyous event. Early Writings, page 182. Then the angel from heaven, with a voice that caused the earth to quake, cried out, Thou Son of God, thy Father calls thee. Come forth. Who called Jesus out of the tomb? Who called him out? The Father. Do you understand why Jesus said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit? I'm commending my life into your hands. Now, he says, you've promised that if I was faithful, that you were going to call me out. So now he's going to be called out. So The angel cries out, thy Father calls thee, come forth. Death could hold dominion over him no longer. Jesus arose from the dead a triumphant conqueror. In solemn awe, the angelic host gazed upon the scene. And as Jesus came forth from the sepulchre, those shining angels prostrated themselves to the earth in worship and hailed him with songs of victory and triumph. And in a moment, we're going to see what song they sang. It's from Revelation chapter 12. Now, somebody might say, but wait a minute, Pastor Bohr. Doesn't the Bible say that Jesus would lay down his life and he would take it up again? That he had authority to lay it down, he had authority to take it up again? How is it that you say the Father was the one who called him from the tomb? Well, let's read John chapter 10, verses 17 and 18. We need to be careful about the way we read Scripture, and we need to read the entire verses, not just part. It says in John chapter 10, 17 and 18, therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power. That's not a very good translation. There are two words that are translated power in the King James Version and New King James. The word dunamis, where we get the word dynamite from. That's not the word here. And the word exousia, which really should be translated authority. In other words, the word that is used here is exousia. Jesus is saying, I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. So you say, Jesus took up his life. Yes, he did. But the only reason he could take up his life, he could come out with the life that was within himself, is because his Father gave him permission to do it. How do we know that? We need to read the last part of verse 18. It says, this command I have received from my Father. So in other words, the Father calls him from the tomb, and Jesus comes out of the tomb with a life that is within himself. In fact, Ellen White says that when Jesus came forth from the tomb, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. Wow. The mighty conqueror. He had gained provision to emancipate the slaves and to recover, he recovered the lost possession. Now, something else happened at the resurrection of Jesus. There was a group that resurrected with him. And I brought this in here because when we deal with the introductory vision of Revelation 4 and 5, we're going to come to the idea that some have that the 24 elders are those who resurrected with Jesus as the first fruits that Jesus took to heaven when he ascended. And we're going to see that that is not a possibility. So it says in Matthew 27, verse 51 through verse 53, then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So Jesus did not resurrect by himself. There was a group of individuals who resurrected with Jesus. And of course, Ellen White, gives us an interesting description of who composed this group. She actually says that they were martyrs from the first who lived upon the earth up till the times of Christ. And so, we can speculate, perhaps Abel was among those who were the first fruits that Jesus took to heaven. Perhaps even John the Baptist, who was beheaded, maybe was among that group. We don't know, but Ellen White does say that they were martyrs who had given their lives to be faithful to Jesus from the beginning of time up to the times of Christ. In other words, he rewarded them with the resurrection and eternal life. So they go for 40 days into the city, and they give witness to the resurrection of Christ. Now, can you imagine what it must have been like if one of them was able to appear to the people in Jerusalem during 40 days? All 15 feet tall. Hi, I am able. And when Jesus resurrected, I resurrected as well, because he says, because I live, you shall live also. Must have been powerful. And they appeared, they didn't appear as ghosts or as spirits. They appeared in flesh and blood. People could actually touch them. Say, yeah, they're real individual people. It must have caused a tremendous ruckus in the city of Jerusalem. You know, the people saying, the Lord has resurrected truly. And all of these has resurrected with him. Now, all heaven sang when Jesus resurrected from the dead. I want you to notice Revelation 12, verse 10. You know, usually we apply Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 12, to the original fall of Satan from heaven, where it says, you know, there that the devil and Satan was cast out with his angels. We say, well, that applies to the original casting out. No, obviously it hints at the idea that Satan and his angels were originally cast out from heaven. But in context, that passage in Revelation 12 is talking about the victory of Jesus on the cross over Satan. We're not going to get into that right now. I've dealt with that in other presentations. But Revelation chapter 12, verse 10 is the verse that was sung, we're going to see in a moment, when Jesus came forth from the grave, when Jesus resurrected from the dead. It says there in Revelation 12, verse 10, "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down.'" Now, in what sense was Satan cast down when Jesus died on the cross? There was an original, don't get me wrong, there was an original casting down. Okay? Satan and his angels were expelled from heaven. But at the cross, Satan was expelled also. Because in John chapter 12, Jesus says, the ruler of this world, now is the judgment, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And he was speaking about his death. In what sense was Satan cast out from heaven when Jesus died? He was cast out from heaven as the representative of planet Earth. You see, who represented planet Earth up to the time that Jesus lived his perfect life and died for sin? Satan had stolen Adam's throne and Adam's territory. But when Jesus resurrects from the dead, he now has the throne and the territory is his. Is Satan going to give up the territory without a fight? No, that's why you have the conflicts in the book of Acts. Satan is saying, I know that the territory is no longer mine, but he's going to have to come and get it. And that's the struggle of the end time. Satan knows that he's going to lose his kingdom and he's going to fight for every inch. He's not just going to roll over and play dead. He's going to fight till the death. Now, how do we know that this hymn was actually sung when Jesus resurrected? In the journal, The Present Truth, February 18, 1886, we find these words. "At the death of Jesus, the earth was wrapped in profound darkness at midday. But at the resurrection, the brightness of the angels illuminates the night, and the inhabitants of heaven sing with great joy and triumph. Thou hast vanquished Satan and the powers of darkness. Thou hast swallowed up death in victory." And now notice the verse that she's going to quote. "And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God, and the power is Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night.'" So Jesus gained the victory. He lived a perfect life, and he paid the penalty of sin. The heavenly beings now sing the song of victory in heaven as Jesus has resurrected. He's still on earth. So now the heavenly beings say, now we need to prepare the party. He said when he left that he was going to go down there for 30 years and he was going to come back. We got to get the throne room ready. We got to gather all of the representatives of the worlds together here because he's going to come back in 40 days. We got to prepare everything to receive back the war hero. And so Revelation chapter 4 and 5, as we're going to see in the sessions this afternoon, describes, Revelation 4 describes the preparation of the heavenly throne room for the return of the war hero, who, by the way, is returning from war with the wounds to prove it, but he's alive. And so in chapter 4, the throne room is prepared, and there present is one sitting on the throne, God the Father, and you have the 4 living creatures in the midst of the throne. You have the 24 elders that surround the throne. You have the 7 lamps of fire, which represent the fact that the Holy Spirit is present there. The whole throne room is being prepared. Jesus is not in chapter 4. The angelic hosts are not in chapter 4 because the angelic hosts have gone to the earth to pick up Jesus and bring him back. And so then in chapter 5, the war hero returns. And he's presented as the lamb as though he had been slain, but he's alive. A lamb as though it had been wounded. And now he comes and he presents himself before the Father on the throne. And Ellen White describes this encounter vividly. We're going to notice that later on. How the Father and the Son met together. And the Son says, Father, is my sacrifice on earth enough to bring all of my brothers and sisters home? And there's silence in heaven at this moment. All of the angels and the heavenly beings have ceased singing. Everything is in suspense as the Son comes close to the Father. And then suddenly the Father embraces his Son. And he said, "Is it enough? Those that I have given you, you can bring with you to heaven." And then the Father utters in his voice like thunder, he says, "Worship him, all the angels of God." And now heaven breaks out in a beautiful hymn of praise to the Lamb and to the one who is seated on the throne. So Revelation chapter 4 and 5 is simply describing the preparation of the throne room and the arrival of Jesus at the throne room at the moment of his ascension. And then, in chapter 6, you have all of the events that transpire after Jesus arrives, the 7 seals, culminating with the time when God's people will sit with Jesus on his throne after they have overcome during the period of the 7 seals. Are you with me? And so basically the 7 seals describe Christian history after the victory of Jesus Christ.